The following video is going to be spoiling the Fire Force manga, in particular the final arc. So if you're an anime only, or if you haven't read it yet, here's your last warning. Fire Force is an awesome story with stunning artwork and a rock and roll attitude. The ending gets really weird and meta, so if that's a turnoff, maybe this manga isn't for you, but otherwise I highly recommend. This isn't meant to be a comprehensive breakdown of the final arc, that'd probably take way too much explaining. Rather, this video will be focused on the finer points of Arthur and Shinra's fights respectively. Perception is a powerful thing. A negative mindset can be a self-fulfilling curse, and a positive one can kickstart a healthy feedback loop. The ending of Okubo Utsushi's Fire Force is very much about the power of one's mind. The world-ending cataclysm literally feeds off the despair and hopelessness of humanity's collective consciousness, and the only way to stop it is to replace that despair in people's hearts with hope and good vibes. It takes the saying, if you can control perception, you can control reality, to the most literal extreme. It's in this setting that Fire Force explores the distance between optimistic and pessimistic people. How could a hopeful person change a doomer's mind and vice versa when the way they fundamentally see the world is different? Before we talk about the doomer though, let's talk about the biggest Chad in Fire Force, Night King Arthur Boyle. Because he's the embodiment of the power optimism can have on an individual. Arthur isn't your typical high school boy. He wears his heart on his sleeve and wears it like a badge of honor. But most importantly, he's delusional. Arthur literally believes himself to be a Night King destined for greatness, and that Company 8 are made up of his loyal subjects. He takes positivity to the point of delusion. However, this isn't a bad thing necessarily, especially because the strength of Arthur's powers are directly determined by his motivation. If he's feeling like a Chad Night King, his blade burns twice as bright. But if he's feeling discouraged or nervous, his power becomes a pitiful epee of puny plasma. Throughout the manga, and especially the final arc, where a great cataclysm threatens to destroy the world, Arthur's battles are just as much about igniting his spirit as it is defeating his enemies. Which is why the almighty dragon was the perfect character to be Arthur's final playmate. You'd think a man who calls himself a dragon and talks like a generic destruction-hungry supervillain would be the perfect roleplay partner to bring out the Night King in Arthur. And he definitely was. Arthur became the strongest he'd ever been in his first encounter with Dragon. He was on top of the world. But to Dragon, the world was a tiny, sad place with nothing to offer. Dragon is an anomaly. An individual born so powerful he was an unstoppable disaster wherever he walked. Because nothing could excite him or challenge him, he joined with the White Clads hoping something worthwhile might happen if the world ended. As it stood, it had nothing to offer him, so he might as well end it all. And Arthur was just another piece of rubble in his wake. But in good old shonen fashion, with some support from his friends, Arthur bounces back stronger than ever. In his second encounter with Dragon, he still doesn't do much more than scratch him. But the fact that he had the gall to try again after being so utterly destroyed the first time, makes Dragon dare to hope again. Maybe this little runt would be worth something after all. But Arthur, not being satisfied with his performance, decides he has to up his game by upping his game. And the ensuing chapters is the most emotional Let's Play of Dragon Quest you can imagine. No, I'm not joking, stick with me. Arthur indulges in a fantasy video game in order to recharge and warm himself up for his upcoming task, which is how an overwhelming majority of people use media like video games and other pastimes. People use it for escapism, to keep their spirits up and to relax in between work. This scene bridges the gap between Arthur's extreme and romanticized portrayal of escapism, and gives the viewer a lens in which to relate to him in a more direct way. Arthur leaves right before finishing the final boss, however, because he spent enough time recharging. It's time to take all of that energy and use it in the real world and solve a tangible problem. Like a real darn firefighter. With the power of unrealistic confidence and optimism, he's ready to challenge the dragon for the third and final time. And brother, I'm not joking when I say reading Arthur vs. Dragon weekly was the most exciting thing happening in my life at the time. It's everything a boy could want from an awesome shonen battle. Seeing dragons smile and laugh and getting wrapped up in Arthur's wavelength while they split the heavens and seas apart in their epic duel. Only to realize Earth was just a bit too small for them, and they take it to the moon! But wait, humans can't breathe in space. That's just a fact, an undeniable reality. Arthur is just a soft, squishy human at the end of the day. But right before Arthur's life is snuffed out, inspiration strikes. In addition to his amazing plasma abilities, Arthur is now using spells and equipment based off of Dragon Quest. And this is where the fight gets really good.
It's time for me to face my ultimate illusion, my finishing fiction, my Dragon Quest!
Excalibur! Forever united king I...
You would not be wrong to call Arthur a fool. He plays make-believe and convinced himself that his twisted perception is reality. And yet from a different angle, you could see him as a man who chooses to live life to the fullest. Arthur enjoys life, he loves it. Isn't it better to be a happy fool than a miserable realist? And can you even call yourself a realist if you haven't even tried earnestly hoping for better? Or tried seeing what you can make for yourself in the world? Even after Dragon's passion reignites, he, just like the White Coat, still believes his salvation lies in death. Arthur thoroughly rejects that notion, claiming that he will strive not only to defeat Dragon, but to make it out of the ordeal alive. Of course, Arthur is prepared to die as any knight should be, and in fact endeavors to enjoy the experience should it happen. But it's not his goal. Death is to be accepted as the inevitable, but not something to be given control. For those that let fear of death and failure stop them, could never hope to slay a dragon. Arthur is pushing for more, and in his push, he realizes his goal. In this attempt pushed by fantasy, the Night King slays the dragon, and the earth is cleansed of its flames. But that's only half the battle. We haven't even mentioned our actual main character Shinra, and his fight against the Doomer's final form. Haumea is a girl who can read the thoughts of others. And eventually she reaches a state where she could hear everyone's thoughts simultaneously, everyone across the planet. And this, more than anything, pushed her to despair. She faces a constant input of emotions both good and bad, and it overwhelms her. She comes to the conclusion that because pessimism and negativity is so rampant in our lives, that ending such pitiful lives would be a mercy. She has given up. Haumea reads pretty transparently as a doomer. For those of you who don't know, a doomer is a person with a pessimistic outlook on life. A doomer feels a sense of helplessness and aimlessness and is often stricken with deep despair for life. They typically have no real motivation to act in any way, because what's the point? Now, I don't think there are many people who fit the plutonic ideal of a doomer, but it is an attitude I see in other people when certain subjects come up, a couple of whom I know personally. Haumea is like a girl who listens to the news, to all the media outlets, and sees all the horrible tragedies, fears, and problems plaguing the world. In the information age, bad news sells better than happy news, and so negativity is pushed to the forefront by financial incentives and by extensions, algorithms. Every fire, every murder, every protest, every disaster that strikes a foreign country, and everything else that could make a person sad is shown. This constant stream of negative information is exactly what began the Doomer movement. Haumea sees the worst of everything, and thus she has no hope, and therefore the world she exists in must be helpless. And standing in her way is Shinra, a boy who strives to give hope to everyone he can reach. It's for that reason he chose to become a firefighter, because he wanted to do whatever he could to make the world a better place. Unlike Haumea, who has a very impersonal relationship with the thoughts she reads, Shinra knows people. He goes outside and tries to touch the lives of others, both as a firefighter and as a human being. And he touches some damn grass while he's at it. He is convinced that people are more complicated than their thoughts. Their actions matter just as much. Even if the quantity of our thoughts lean towards negativity, that doesn't mean life is a net loss, or that people won't fight to preserve it. We literally have survival instincts built into our brains in order to grasp at any chance of survival. It is in a human's nature to hope. And even if we despair, contradiction is integral to the human experience. We can feel differently about a problem depending on our mood or what kind of person we are in that moment. Sure, you could sit on the sidelines, talk about how pointless everything is, and say everyone is a hypocrite because never contradicting yourself even slightly is an impossibility. But that attitude won't get you anywhere next to a fool who pushes for a better tomorrow. A negative attitude is self-defeating. If you say life has no meaning because it will eventually end, you're not exactly wrong. Because all life will end and nothing has permanence. I'm temporary and so is every thought, feeling, and relationship I've ever had and will have. But that doesn't mean we should chase death. We can't have countless tomorrows, but we can have today, and I feel that's something more precious than I can even properly put into words. You can choose to do nothing or something, and doing something tends to lead you towards accomplishment, happiness, human connection, and that creates a positive feedback loop. Accomplishment can encourage you, and human connections can inspire you. But that brings us back to our problem. How can you convince a pessimist that the world isn't as bad as they believe it to be? Maybe you can continue to justify your optimism to yourself, but they might only see you as a fool. I'm sure if a doomer read Fire Force, they'd think Haumea was much more convincing than Shinra. And I know this is true because I've literally seen it happen. The idea of different people seeing the world differently is emphasized by how all the other characters have to fight doppelgangers, who represent the ways characters are seen and perceived by other people, clashing with the originals and how they define themselves. Even when people, actions, and events are recorded, our subjective understanding still has such an effect. Shinra tries showing Haumea the beauty in life, but that doesn't convince her. She tells Shinra that an exceptional hero like himself can't fully empathize with weakness, and how negativity will continue to grow in us no matter what. So Shinra decides to inject a bit of madness into the world. If the fear of death and cataclysm leads towards despair and inaction, maybe we'd be better off not caring so much about what we can't control. Shinra recreates the world and, in the process, lessen the value of life. Now, on its face, this sounds terrifying. How could Shinra do something so cold, degrading the most valuable thing in the universe, using his newfound godlike abilities? But what this actually means is that people will care less about abstract ideas they'll never really understand, like death and the countless potential ways humanity might be destroyed. And instead, try and look at what's around them. Ask yourself, who are the people who care about you specifically, as an individual and not as some collective? And then ask yourself, what and who is it that you specifically care about? Because even a shut-in doomer neat like Haumea has meaningful relationships. She just has to capitalize on them, if she wants to get more out of life. If you stop to cry over every tragedy in the world, you won't ever stop. You have to accept the things you cannot change, have the courage to change the things you can for you and everyone's benefit, and have the wisdom to know the difference. But a bit of stubbornness and a good attitude might push you to change more than you initially thought you could. A good attitude is the most useful tool a person can have in everyday life. Even if life is destined to end in death, that doesn't mean life can't be rock and roll until then. I suppose before I end off, I should talk about how Fire Force is actually a prequel to Okubo's previous work, Soul Eater. Now, is this connection hella cool? Absolutely. But I don't think it's really important to understand Soul Eater to get Fire Force and vice versa. What I do think is really cool, however, is Fire Force is largely about how people deal with external problems and dangers. This is a manga about firefighters after all, while Soul Eater is primarily about finding peace as an individual and then adapting that peace to resonate and connect with other people internally. Maybe that's a distinction without a difference because Soul Eater also involves world-saving stakes that must be overcome with the right mindset and whatnot, but I think it's neat. Thank you all so much for watching. Special thanks to my good old pal Shiki the Slicker for proofreading my script here and offering a few suggestions. It was plenty helpful. Like, sub, you know the drill, and I hope you have a good one.